Out of all the shows on Netflix, Arcane barrels through the noise and stands above everything else as being the best show on the platform. It's so groundbreaking in every aspect of production, from the writing, directing, animation, editing, and acting. Trying to even analyze the show is a daunting task, and I'll distill down into 4 primary reasons as to why Arcane is Netflix's rushed magnum opus. The first major one that really takes it to another level in the second season is its ambitious and innovative story. Season 1 was more grounded and focused more heavily on the characters, while Season 2 goes full-on war mode into cosmic insanity. The ambition and pure creativity in tackling a subject such as this, where characters are transcending reality with their consciousnesses splitting across the cosmos, is insane from a writing standpoint. All the while, making this coherent and having the characters still be at the forefront of the narrative is a massive achievement. The writers keep the turmoil the characters go through as a constant and upfront through line. We may be in a crazily mind-bending environment, but the strong and intense interpersonal conflict is where the quality of the narrative derives from. Which, addressing the overall ending between Jace and Victor, it's just literal perfection. Going full circle and having Victor be the one to influence Jace from the very beginning was a brilliant twist. It simultaneously acts as a euphoric moment while also having a major payoff for these two characters. Victor learning that solving all challenges and mysteries in life submerges humanity in a dreamless solitude, and Jace rebonding and joining fates with Victor adds an additional layer to this already massive cake of brilliance. It's thematically deep, the characters are intriguing, are constantly changing, and the narrative is evolving in such interesting ways that it explodes your mind into a million pieces, and this is why I'm primarily using the ending as this example. Another crazy aspect about this ambitious narrative is all the fracturing subplots and how important each one ended up being. Halfway through Season 2, I was like, how is all of this going to come together and actually pay off? And to my absolute surprise, everything ended up weaving together in such an impactful way. One of the best examples is the first scene in the finale where Echo has to convince Jinx to not blow herself up since he can rewind time. It's a perfect usage of this new established mechanic that also directly impacts and changes the characters it's being used on. Going back to the whole point that the writers never lose sight of the strong emphasis on character work. Seeing Echo trial and error and slowly work his way to the solution of saving Jinx was so engaging and had a strong and riveting progression. The finale is chock full of these moments, and it's a constant barrage of excellent and exciting payoff. So much to the point that I wish the finale was split into 2 episodes because it deals with a lot. Not only are we being thrown into a war, but we're also blitzing through so many deaths and character endings. This is the cost of having such an ambitious story and only having 9 episodes to tell it. I feel like everyone can agree that Season 2 at the very least needed about 12 episodes to feel more complete. Although, it's hard to get upset over this problem since the story was still executed incredibly, especially given the circumstances of limited time. At first, I kind of disliked how certain subplots would vanish for multiple episodes, but at the same time, I think their choice of selectively focusing on specific subplots for longer uncut durations allowed them more time to breathe in an already extremely fast-paced story. This is shown the best in episode 7, where we get the full story of Echo, Jace, and Heimerdinger. If this were cut up in any other way, like spread out across multiple episodes, I don't think it would have as strong of an impact. With the sacrifice of not seeing these characters since episode 3, we're able to get an uninterrupted slice of peace in a season submerged in chaos. Looking at it from that perspective, I think that's brilliant. Not to mention that the writers are injecting this new overall theme at the perfect time of what life could have been like without all of the senseless violence. It synergizes with the ending of Jinx's arc in episode 8, where she realizes the faults of Silco, and that revenge and killing is a perpetual cycle that is lost to time, and the true show of strength is just walking away. This is inherently the tragedy of Season 1, where peace was so close to being accomplished, only to be subverted by Jinx blowing up the council, perpetuating the cycle of violence. Yet another 10 out of 10 ending. But episode 7 reintroduces this theme in a literal way of realizing a reality that hasn't been crushed by this wheel of violence. That's why I feel like the writers put episode 7 in the beginning of Act 3 because it initiates a thematic arc for the rest of the story. That, and they also get to explore this what-if version of Jinx that I found to be wholly intriguing. It kind of reinforces that there still is a good character under the surface, and I'll definitely go into more about the character work in a bit. But I think the way this season is structured is secretly genius. And what was otherwise what I perceived as a flaw in that characters disappeared for a while actually turned out to be a great intention to the benefit of the show. One last aspect that goes into Arcane Season 2 being insanely ambitious and innovative is that every episode has characters changing greatly, and there are major twists happening constantly. The sheer frequency at which major story events happen is head-spinning, and most stories only receive a fraction of this through their entire season, if that. For any other show, each act of Season 2 would have been a whole season worth of content. In an era where a lot of shows drag out and milk their stories, I find Arcane to be commendable in this regard. It would still be preferable to have more episodes to further flesh out the story, characters, and themes, but the behind-the-scenes situation for Arcane is really complicated. Riot is self-financing the show, and they're only being paid $6 million per episode, when each one costs about $14 million. So delivering more episodes in Season 2 is questionable, given contractual standings, and I can sympathize with their decision to not do a Season 3. And if anything, the creators have learned from this and probably won't repeat this mistake again, and they have been constantly proving their immense talent throughout the show. So the result of all this is that every episode turns out to be stuffed to the brim with groundbreaking plot beats, which is wholly unprecedented. This I feel is one of the main reasons why Season 2 felt so addictively electric. This comes with a downside of the pacing being too fast, but I feel as though this is alleviated with the pure efficiency in storytelling. This is going into the next pillar of greatness for Arcane in that, since the creators only had 9 episodes to execute this massive epic, they had to be smart in terms of how they spend every single second of screen time. Rewatching some episodes especially, you start to pick up on all the nuances in storytelling, whether this be through detailed points of acting that convey a lot of interpersonal information, or quick actions that happen in the background to set up future events. One of the best examples of this is in Season 2 Episode 6, where Jinx's surrogate child 𝘙𝘴 has a lot of background development. This can be seen through the quick moment where she looks at Vi's gauntlets, and you can see when she enters the frame that she pockets something, foreshadowing the ending of the episode, and throughout she builds a subtle relationship with Vander. The creators didn't have enough time to dedicate entire scenes to some of these character beats, and instead opted to have this go on simultaneously amongst other bigger moments to save time. Now, the death of 𝘙𝘴 I feel could have landed harder, as in us building a stronger bond with her over the course of more scenes, but the montage leading up to her death was an excellent creative decision to combat this. I think this was a great compromise where instead of dedicating a bunch of screen time to Jinx and 𝘙𝘴 messing around, we instead get the slice of happy moments they spent together. And some of these cuts were genuinely amazing, like her jumping off this piece of metal, match cutting to her and Jinx taking a massive leap. This paired with the music swelling and climaxing as we live through this sublime and wonderful time quickly builds and makes up for any kind of lack of attachment we had with this character. That and just the editing alone for this scene is insane, with how efficiently it communicates so many emotional beats and how that escalates throughout the scene. Like, I didn't really care for 𝘙𝘴 up until this point, but through the directing and editing, they quickly made her death feel way more impactful than it should have been. Another aspect of editing that is employed quite frequently is intercutting scenes together, and sometimes to the complete benefit of the story. This adds to the efficiency of the narrative, and the best showcase of this is the climax of Season 2 Episode 3, where Vi's squad fights Jinx's, and this happens simultaneously with Jace interacting with the Chaos Rune. The reason why this example stands out in such a grand way is that the writers cleverly come up with a way to connect these two climactic moments together. Every time Jace interacts and disturbs the Chaos Rune, it in turn disrupts all of the Hextech equipment, thus evolving and molding the action scene into cool and interesting new directions that isn't just another stereotypical fight. So not only are we intercutting and saving time, but we're also synergizing these two moments together while introducing new mechanics that further enriches the action. And this is also just entirely ignoring how great the animation and visuals are in this action scene, which I'll get into in the end of the video. So the directors are not only using a basic form of editing to cut back and forth between two subplots, but they're creatively doing so to add new meaning to the story, which I've never really seen done before, since generally that's not possible as these are two separate events that can't impact each other. This form of editing, or parallel editing, is used a lot in the finale where there's a bunch of coinciding action scenes happening all at once, and the way they all intercept has great catharsis and narrative importance. Like when Mel saves Catelyn from being executed, I was straight up stunned by how shocking that moment was, and then this leads into yet another climactic fight. The plotline flows so effortlessly, and there's no downtime and fat in this story. It feels so optimized, and every single shot carries an immense amount of information and is extremely intentional. This also applies to the increased usage of montages in Season 2. Some people may see this as a negative as they may prefer slower and more developed scenes, but I think a well-executed montage can actually be to the benefit of the story. Like one whole time period that we essentially skip over via a montage is the start of the Piltover vs. Zahn conflict. However, this is done through a visually creative and exuberant fashion to the point that it imbues the story with a new layer of amazing presentation. It would be nice to see these moments play out, and you can definitely write out certain arcs to be told, but as we analyzed earlier, the behind-the-scenes nature for Arcane probably put limitations on the story's execution in terms of how much screen time they had. Because of this, I can be a bit lenient as to them using more montages. As long as we don't miss out on any essential character beats and the storytelling is properly communicated visually through the montages, then I think that's definitely a great compromise. It's a natural and clever solution, allowing them to selectively focus on the most important parts of the story, or at least what the writers want to explore the most and what they think has the most narrative depth. So I think the creators genuinely made the absolute best of their situation. Before moving on, I want to go back to the acting point I raised earlier in terms of how detailed it is and how much is portrayed through every minor action. Generally, when you think of animation, you normally don't associate great acting with it because you don't get the same high visual fidelity and detail of capturing a raw live-action face. But the animators and directors within Arcane managed to overcome this obstacle, and there's a striking amount of nuance in really every emotional dialogue scene. This is also crucial in terms of saving time because you can quickly communicate key character beats with fast expressions instead of through lines of dialogue. One aspect of writing that I feel a lot of writers don't really think about is sometimes writing less ends up communicating more. If you can convey information without dialogue purely through emotion and expressions, then that can actually be more compelling at times. It shows that the writer has constraint and follows the core principle of show don't tell, along with giving the actors more freedom and space to deliver a better performance. For me personally, I love the moments where the dialogue peels back and the characters express themselves non-verbally. It's really engaging because it connects the viewer more intimately with the characters. So to go back to how this makes the narrative more efficient, you tend to get more mileage and can densely pack in more information with these quick and subtle expressions. I can genuinely talk about how impressively crafted this story is as there's so much to be analyzed, but between the points I raised within the acting, directing, editing, and writing, the story is extremely optimized down to every frame, and this is an aspect I think is drastically overlooked. One of the biggest achievements for writing in Arcane is how excellent its character arcs are. This was the major selling point of Season 1, and the descent into madness and tragedy of Powder/Jinx was a masterpiece. I still view the ending of Season 1, Episode 3 as being one of the best moments in the entire show, which is extremely impressive because a show hitting that height in just 3 episodes is practically unheard of. But what I find just as interesting in Season 2 is that instead of going in a stereotypical direction where Jinx becomes the main villain, they actually inverse her entire character arc from Season 1. If her journey was essentially going right on this graph, then Season 2 is the opposite. If you're also in tune with paying attention to why certain characters are created and their overall purpose, then you'll quickly realize that Isha was primarily made to send Jinx on this arc. On one hand, this seemed a little obvious to me, but at the same time, I love that it mirrors her relationship with 𝘙𝘴𝘩. She's taking in this orphan child, and through taking care of her, it rekindles the warm light of humanity that was extinguished within her. Just like with 𝘙𝘴𝘩, where he did genuinely seem to care for Jinx, even though that was enshrouded in doubt from his devious and conniving nature. I still would have liked more scenes between 𝘙𝘴 and Jinx, but we can still see a clear evolution for Jinx's character, going from being completely irredeemable to having a strong commendable aspect that starts to reinvigorate her, remending past broken relationships, and going as far to being beloved and becoming a hero. This fundamental arc is such a monumental achievement in writing because it's extremely difficult to pull off as you're completely inversing your character, while also doing this in a plausible fashion that further saturates the character with more depth by uncovering deeper layers that have been obscured by negative characteristics. Just saying that out loud gives me anxiety for writing characters in general. This character arc alone is an outstanding achievement for Season 2, but that's really just the surface because Victor also has a pretty insane evolution. And I also mean that quite literally. Jinx's journey is what everyone thinks Season 2 is going to be about, but just like the iceberg meme, the actual story is far deeper and ends up primarily being about Victor. This subversion kind of ties back to the innovative story point where the story pivoting into primarily focusing on Victor being the antagonist catches everyone off guard. And it also happens at the perfect time where this starts to ramp up as Jinx gets closer to her hero status. Now, I wouldn't say that Victor's character arc is as emotionally rich as Jinx's, but the way his arc affects the story is purely mind-boggling. Also, at no point does Victor's drive and motivation ever feel contrived given its immense weight. Generally, when you have these types of world-ending threats, the story immediately becomes contrived as to nerf them so they don't accomplish their goal. He's always doing what he does because he genuinely thinks he's bettering humanity. That's been his core drive from the beginning of the show, and now that's being applied through this godlike messiah fashion. But really, I think his arc is extremely juicy from the perspective of irony in that him trying to save humanity is ultimately leading to its downfall. But looking at Victor in general, I think it's a major achievement having your protagonist characters essentially turning into antagonists. This applies to basically most of the characters in Arcane, which is crazy to me. It goes to show how complex and morally complicated everyone is. Shows are generally lucky to have at least one great villain who isn't flat out evil, while Arcane manages to achieve this with Jinx, 𝘙𝘴𝘩, 𝘙𝘴𝘩, Victor, Singed, Jayce without context, and even Catelyn for a short period of time. There's oddly only a few main characters who haven't at one point partially turned into an antagonist. This is basically the inverse of any other normal show where the good guy always remains as being the hero, and there's not much room for moral complexity. While in Arcane, characters are constantly evolving and having their senses of morality be manipulated by the circumstances of the story. This creates so many fleshed out, real, and iconic characters, and this makes all of their journeys absolutely riveting. And speaking of their journeys, from a plot perspective, they're also all interweaving and clashing with one another, which further affects these characters and their arcs. Dynamics like Vi and Catelyn, Jinx and Vi, and Jayce and Victor are always growing in unpredictable directions, and depending on who intersects with who, the story can go on dramatically different paths. Even the side characters have immense agency and greatly influence the plot, like the story physically wouldn't even operate with one of the smaller characters like Singed. This level of intricacy in the narrative I feel is another testament to how great the writing is, and creates a strong and intriguing level of mystery as to what the direction of the story could be. It's also insane that, given how cramped this season is, the writers are still able to include multiple flashbacks throughout the season that further fleshes out pre-established characters, while also making them feel naturally integrated, like with Vander's flashbacks, where we see glimpses of that when Victor tries to penetrate his mind. But yeah, in an overall sense, I think the character work, their arcs, how they all mesh together, their complexity, and how they're portrayed is astounding. And this also applies to the vast majority of the character roster. Since I've been gushing about every aspect of production, I think I also need to highlight how phenomenal the animation is. Season 1 in of itself was groundbreaking with scenes like the bridge fight between Echo and Jinx, but I think the creators applied that level of animation innovation to almost every episode with specific distinct scenes. They all have some kind of unique animation aspect that energizes it with originality and freshness. Whether that be through Savika breaking in her new arm where the animation style shifts into this explosive retro pixelation, episode 3 where the weapons start glitching and we're introduced to the crazily visually mind-bending style of the Chaos Rune, the Paint the Town Blue montage using graffiti and freeze frames with a black and white style besides the color blue, exploring Vander's psyche which bursts with creativity and presentation, Echo and Jinx's dance cutting its frame rate in half, and having the frames smearing, creating this surreal and lovely tone, and the entire ending is just too overwhelming to even analyze. I feel like since we have 6 hours worth of this content, we start to underappreciate how great the animation is at times. It's operating at a constant high point. I've also seen the sentiment among fans that the action was worse this season, but I honestly can't disagree more. We have plenty of great standalone action scenes, and the way they're animated with how they seamlessly blend slow motion and sell every impact is amazing. Like, just the singular moment of Vi uppercutting Vander was awe-inspiring. But looking outside of the action, I also love how the creatives experimented with different animation styles. Like, the flashbacks with Vander are done in this painterly style, and watching the colors diffuse away as his life force was fading was so tragic. Even his psyche, where Victor was exploring his consciousness, was done in such a visually euphoric way. I'd love to just see all the concept art of all the different ways they'd envision executing these scenes. But I think by far the biggest achievement this season for the animation was their execution of Victor's headspace. The universe plane and how this was animated was just flat out stunning in every frame. And even the way they transition in and out of the setting was always done with so much creativity. And just in general, the scene transitions this season were on another level. But yeah, I don't feel like I need to go extremely in depth about why the animation is so great, because it's just indisputably incredible. To end the video, I know season 2 was rather divisive in terms of how quickly its story was executed, but I still think given the obstacle of only having 9 episodes, they still did a great job. There are definitely some underdeveloped aspects, like quite a few character endings and how certain overall story beats played out, and if that upsets you, then I think that's definitely valid. However, the height season 2 achieves is still insane, and has plenty of other grand achievements. Thank you for watching, and my Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description. And hey, thank you incredibly to my top patron, Logan Farmer.